July 1943. Hamburg nights had never been this dark. The sky was trembling with the engine sound of hundreds of British bomber planes. Sirens rang, but it was already too late. Within minutes, the city caught fire. The wind carried the fire like a wall through the streets. Houses melted, people collapsed from lack of oxygen. This wasn't just a bombardment. It was a firestorm. Temperature rose to 800 degrees. Asphalt melted, glass vaporized. Hamburg disappeared in one night. That night, Germany experienced its darkest hour. But the real question is, was this really a military operation, or vengeance itself? In this video, you'll learn how the RAF set Hamburg on fire and why that night is remembered in history as Germany's darkest hour. Before we begin the story, please hit the like button. It helps us reach more people with these forgotten stories. Subscribe, turn on notifications. On the Germany at War channel, we tell the real stories of the war from the German side. And leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get back to the story. Hamburg in the summer of 1943 was Germany's second-largest city, 1.8 million population, a giant port, industrial center, U-boat shipyards, tank factories, oil refineries. The city was strategic, the heart of Germany's war machine. But Hamburg wasn't just a military target. Civilians lived there too. Families, children, elderly, workers. Gertrude Weber was one of them. When the war started in 1939, Hamburg was a normal city. The ports were busy. Factories were operating. People went to work. Children went to school. In 1940, the first bombardments began. RAF night raids, small scale, a few dozen planes. Targets were shipyards, docks, industrial areas. Damage was limited. Deaths were in the hundreds. Hamburgers got used to shelters. Air defense was strengthened. Flak guns, searchlights, night fighters. 1941, 1942. Bombardments continued. But the city was still standing. People were still living. Factories were still producing. Hamburg was a resilient city. Northern German character. Tough, durable, never giving up. But in the summer of 1943, something was changing. RAF had developed a new tactic. Name, area bombing. The target was no longer just factories. The target was the entire city. Civilian neighborhoods, residential areas. Purpose: break German morale, stop production, destroy the will to war. Air Marshal Arthur Harris, RAF Bomber Command Commander, was saying openly, "We will wipe Germany's cities off the map." Hamburg was at the top of the list. The evening of July 24th, the final briefing was being held at RAF Bomber Command Headquarters. 791 aircraft were ready. 2,396 pilots and crew. Target, Hamburg City Center. Payload, 2,300 tons of bombs. Half high explosive, half incendiary bombs. A new weapon would be tested. Window. Window was a simple concept. Aluminum foils, 27 centimeter long strips, would be dropped from planes. Thousands, tens of thousands. German radars would see them, but couldn't distinguish them from real planes. Radar screens would be confused. Night fighters would be blind. It would be used for the first time. Tonight. At 22:30, the first plane took off. RAF Elvington in Yorkshire. Lancaster bomber, followed by another, then another. 791 aircraft took off within 90 minutes. They were flying toward Hamburg, 100 kilometers, 100 kilometer distance, 3-hour flight. The planes were flying at 6,000 meters altitude. Cold, dark, dangerous. Every pilot knew. Some wouldn't return. Flak guns, night fighters, engine failure. Death awaited over Hamburg, but orders were orders. Duty was duty. At 23:30, German radar stations caught the first signals. Over the North Sea, a large formation. Hundreds of planes. Hamburg air defense went on alert. At 23:45, sirens rang. Gertrude Weber took her children, ran to the shelter. It was the apartment building's basement. Thick concrete walls, 40-person capacity. Inside was packed. Neighbors, elderly, babies. Everyone was silent. Only baby crying and the distant sound of plane engines. Klaus gripped his mother's hand tightly. "Mother, I'm scared." Gertrude stroked her son's hair. "Everything will be fine," she said. But even her own voice didn't sound convincing. July 25th, 1943, 00:57. The first bombs fell. High explosives, 4,000 pounds weight, called blockbuster, leveling buildings. Explosions shook the city. Windows shattered. Walls cracked. Then came incendiary bombs. Thousands of them. Small cylinder-shaped bombs. Inside magnesium, phosphorus, thermite, burning at 2,000 degrees C. Couldn't be extinguished. Even water didn't work. Bombs fell on roofs, streets, parks. Fire started everywhere. Gertrude's apartment shook. Ceiling dust fell. Lights went out. Darkness. Someone lit a flashlight. Flickering light. Everyone looked at each other. Frightened faces. Then explosion. Very close. The apartment's outer wall. The building swayed. Heidi screamed. Gertrude hugged her tightly. "Shh, be quiet, dear. Be quiet." But screams were coming. From upstairs. Someone was injured. Fire brigade teams were working outside, trying to extinguish fires. But there were too many fires. Thousands of fire points. Fire brigade was insufficient. And the bombardment was still continuing. 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, non-stop, uninterrupted. Rain of bombs. At 01:45, the bombardment stopped. 791 planes had dropped their bombs, were returning to England, but Hamburg was burning. Gertrude came out of the shelter, saw outside, and froze. The sky was red. Everywhere was in flames. The opposite apartment had collapsed. The street was full of rubble. People were shouting, running. "Klaus, Heidi, stay inside," she said. "I'll be right back." Her neighbor, Frau Hoffmann, was under the rubble. Gertrude could hear her. "Hilfe! Hilfe! Help!" Gertrude ran, started removing rubble. Her hands bled, but she didn't stop. Others came. Together they lifted. They pulled out Frau Hoffmann. Her leg was broken, but she was alive. Around 20-plus buildings had collapsed. There must have been hundreds dead. But this was just the beginning. July 25th, daytime. Hamburg people were seeing the damage. 500 dead. Major damage to 800 buildings. Shipyards weren't hit, but civilian neighborhoods were devastated. Gertrude took her children. Decided to go to her mother's house. Altona district. Maybe safer. They walked in the streets. Rubble. Burned cars. Broken glass. Klaus saw something. On the ground. A hand. Coming out from under the rubble. "Mother, look!" Gertrude turned Klaus's face away. "Don't look. Keep walking. An 8-year-old child shouldn't see this. But war was like this. There was no innocence. German authorities were trying to convince the crowd, the worst is behind us. We'll repair the city. We'll endure. But RAF's plans were different. This was just the first night. RAF had given this operation a code name, Gomorrah. From the Bible. The sin cities God destroyed with fire. Sodom and Gomorrah. Hamburg would be like this. The operation plan was simple but violent. Continuous attack for 10 days. RAF bombardment at night. USAAF bombardment during day. Don't let the city breathe. Prevent repair work. Completely break morale. July 25th, daytime, USAAF came. 8th Air Force, B-17 Flying Fortress bombers, 68 planes. Target, shipyards, docks. It was precision bombing. Daytime, high altitude, bomb site. In theory, civilian casualties should be low. But war didn't go according to theory. Bombs missed the target. Fell on residential areas. 100 more civilians died. Hamburg people were in shock. 2 bombardments within 24 hours. RAF at night. Americans during day. The city started emptying. Trains, buses, trucks, women, children, elderly. They were fleeing Hamburg to rural areas, other cities. Gertrude also decided. Went to her mother's house. "Take the children," she said. "Take them to the countryside, to Uncle's farm. They're safe there." "Won't you come?" asked her mother. "I can't," said Gertrude. "I have to protect my apartment. My belongings are there. My life is there." It was a terrible mistake, but she didn't know then. July 26th daytime. Another USAF attack. 54 B-17s. Again, targeted shipyards. Again, civilian areas were hit. Gertrude stayed in the city, helped with repair work, removed rubble, helped the wounded, returned home in the evening, was tired, was hopeless, but still alive. That night she couldn't sleep. There was a feeling, bad feeling, knot in her stomach, and she was right. July 27th, 1943, 22:45. Sirens rang again. Gertrude ran to the shelter. This time the apartment was almost empty. Most people had fled. Only 12 people were in the shelter. At 23:30, the planes came. This time 787 planes. Lancaster, Halifax, Stirling. This time 2,326 tons of bombs. But this time, something was different. Weather conditions, temperature was 32 degrees, humidity 30%, wind light from the east, perfect conditions, and RAF had changed the target. This time not shipyards, this time Hammerbrook, Ham, Borgfelde, dense residential areas, narrow streets, wooden buildings, flammable. The first bombs fell at 00:57. High explosives blew off roofs, broke windows, opened buildings. Then came incendiary bombs. Thousands, tens of thousands, fell on every building, fell on every street, fell on every roof. Phosphorus, magnesium, thermite. Fire started instantly. Hundreds of points, thousands of points, and then, within 20 minutes, the fires merged. One giant fire, kilometers wide, and the firestorm began. Firestorm. Feuersturm. The word the German people would never forget. The physics was simple, but terrible. Giant fire produces massive heat. Hot air rises, creates vacuum, cold air is pulled from outside, creates wind, and wind feeds the fire. More oxygen, higher temperature. The cycle feeds itself, grows exponentially. In Hamburg that night, wind speed reached 240 kilometers per hour. People stuck to asphalt. Asphalt melted. People sank into it. Wind blew people away, threw them into the fire. Buildings collapsed. Streets disappeared. Oxygen depleted. People suffocated. Without burning, just from lack of oxygen. Underground shelters turned into ovens. People were cooked alive. Gertrude's apartment was hit at 01:15. Incendiary bomb fell on the roof. The roof immediately caught fire. In the shelter, people smelled smoke, felt heat. "We have to get out!" someone shouted. "No!" Gertrude shouted. "Outside is more dangerous." But the ceiling was heating up. Couldn't be touched. They had to decide. Stay and suffocate. Or go out and burn. Gertrude opened the door, saw outside, and was horrified. It was hell. The street was in flames. Buildings were collapsing. People were running, burning. The wind was so strong it was impossible to stand. Gertrude held onto the door. "Back," she shouted. "Back inside!" She closed the door. But they couldn't hold on anymore. Smoke was filling. Oxygen was decreasing. At 01:47, the building collapsed. People were in the shelter. None survived. The morning of July 28th, Hamburg's appearance was indescribable. Square kilometers of area completely destroyed. Leveled, ash and rubble. 16,000 residential buildings had been destroyed. Official figure, 42,600 dead. Real figure, probably 50,000 or more. Most couldn't be identified. Turned to ash. Nothing remained. 7,330 civilians were left homeless. In a single night, rescue teams were in shock. They had seen a lot, but they hadn't seen this. Bodies were stuck to asphalt, removed with shovels. Underground shelters were opened. Inside was like an oven. Bodies were unrecognizable, had shrunk, had burned. In one shelter, 370 people were found. None had burned, but all were dead. Suffocated. Oxygen had depleted. Klaus and Heidi, Gertrude's children, were safe in the countryside. But they didn't know their mother was dead yet. They would learn a week later. German authorities panicked. Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda, came to Hamburg, saw the ruins, made a speech. The German people are strong. These barbarians cannot defeat us. But his speech was empty. People weren't listening to propaganda anymore. They had lost their families. They had lost their homes. They had lost their lives. Hamburg Gauleiter Karl Kaufmann declared a state of emergency. Evacuate the city. Evacuate everyone. Trains, buses, trucks, all were operated. 1 million people were evacuated from Hamburg. Within 10 days, Germany's second-largest city turned into a ghost town. But RAF wasn't finished yet. July 29th, daytime, US RAF came again. 186 B-17s bombed shipyards. More damage. July 30th night, RAF came again. 726 planes. This time, Wilhelmsburg and Harburg districts. Less dense, but again, thousands of fires. August 2nd night, the last major attack. 47 RAF planes. Target northern Hamburg. Within 10 days, 9,000 tons of bombs fell on Hamburg. Total dead, 42,600. Official. Real, 50,000 plus. Wounded, 37,000. Homeless, 1,000. Destroyed buildings, 277,000. Destroyed area, 30 square kilometers. Hamburg had disappeared. The Hamburg disaster shook German leadership. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, presented a report to Hitler. If 6 more cities are hit like Hamburg, the war will be lost. Hitler read the report, got angry, hit his fist on the table. We will take revenge. We will destroy London. But these were empty words. Germany didn't have the capacity to destroy London. The Luftwaffe had weakened. On the Eastern Front, in the Mediterranean, in the West, it was fighting everywhere. Resources were insufficient. Goebbels made propaganda. Hamburg people are resisting heroically. We're rebuilding. But reality was different. People were fleeing. Morale had collapsed. For the first time, German people thought they might lose the war. Air defense was reviewed. More flak guns, more night fighters. Better radar, but window was still effective. Radar systems were being blinded. Germany couldn't change the course of the war. The Hamburg attack was a turning point in strategic bombing. RAF proved it was possible to completely destroy a city. With a single operation, Arthur Harris, RAF commander, was satisfied. We'll do the same to all of Germany's cities. And he did. The next 2 years, Cologne, Essen, Dortmund, Dresden, Berlin. Each wasn't as bad as Hamburg, but all were terrible. Dresden, February 1945, 25,000 dead. Some estimates 40,000. Berlin, 1943-1945, dozens of attacks. 20,000 plus dead. By the end of the war, 50% of German cities were devastated. 600,000 civilians died in bombardment. 7.5 million civilians were left homeless. The Hamburg bombardment is one of the war's most controversial events. Was it necessary? Was it legitimate? Was it ethical? Defenders say Germany started the war, bombed London, bombed Coventry. Hamburg was justice. Hamburg was a strategic target. Shipyards, factories had military importance. Area bombing hit the German war economy, reduced production, shortened the war. Civilian casualties tragic. But war is like this. There would be more deaths if the war lasted longer. Critics say targeting civilians is a war crime. 50,000 civilians died in Hamburg. Most women, children, elderly. Area bombing didn't seriously affect the German war economy. Production peaked in 1944. Not moral. Firestorm was deliberately created for maximum civilian death. Not revenge. Terrorism. Historians still debate. Some see Harris as a killer. Some see him as a hero. The truth is probably in the middle. Hamburg was a strategic target. But was killing 50,000 civilians necessary? Indefensible. Germany bombed London. But two wrongs don't make a right. War is terrible. And Hamburg was one of war's most terrible moments. Hamburg today is a modern city. 1.8 million population. Germany's second largest city. But traces still remain. St. Nikolai Church in Hamburg's center. Bombed in 1943. Tower remained standing, but building was destroyed, never rebuilt, left as a monument. Memory of the war. Every year on July 27th, a memorial ceremony is held. Survivors come. Few remain now. Most are 80, 90 years old. In 2010, Klaus Weber came. He was 75 years old. Found the plaque bearing his mother's name. Thousands of names were there. Names of victims. Klaus placed his hand on the plaque. Shed tears. 7 years have passed, he said. But I still remember. Every night I see it in my dreams. I hear the sirens. I feel the fire. Heidi wasn't there. She had died in 1987 from cancer. But before dying, she had said, "Hamburg killed me." It just took 60 years. Trauma continued for generations. The Hamburg bombardment was a turning point in modern warfare. For the first time, a city was systematically destroyed. With a single operation, for the first time, firestorm was deliberately created, used as a weapon. For the first time, civilians were targeted. Not just collateral damage, main target. This was the peak of strategic bombing, and also its collapse, because Hamburg showed area bombing doesn't win the war. Factories are still producing. Armies are still fighting. But civilians are dying. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And in the end, everyone loses. Hamburg isn't well known. But Dresden is known. Why? Dresden, February 15th, 1945. 25,000 dead. Less than Hamburg, but Dresden became symbolic. The war was almost over. Germany was losing. Dresden had no military importance, was full of refugees, and yet it was bombed. Again firestorm. Again, thousands dead. Dresden was seen as unnecessary destruction. Hamburg was seen as strategic necessity. But for the victims, there was no difference. 1,000 civilians who died in Hamburg, 25,000 civilians who died in Dresden, all innocent, all victims. Hamburg showed the failure of German air defense. 1 RAF planes, only 12 shot down. 1.5% loss, unacceptably low. Why? Window, aluminum foils. Blinded German radars. Night fighters couldn't find targets. Radar operators saw thousands of signals on the screen. Which was a real plane? Which was foil? Couldn't distinguish. After Hamburg, Germany tried to develop new tactics. Wilde Sau, wild boar tactic. Night fighters would fly without radar, find targets by eye, would see planes in the firelight, partially worked. But wasn't enough. RAF losses increased. 5%, 7%, sometimes 10%. But didn't stop. Germany was losing. The air war, and the land war, and the sea war, on every front. Joseph Goebbels tried to use Hamburg for propaganda. Savage British bombers killed innocent German women and children. This is proof of Anglo-American barbarism. Films were made. Photos were published. Stories of courage were told, but the German people weren't being convinced. because propaganda couldn't change reality. Hamburg had disappeared. 50,000 people had died. 1 million people were homeless. No matter how much Goebbels spoke, this didn't change. And for the first time, German people started questioning Nazi leadership. Why did this happen? Why couldn't they protect us? Why did we go to war? The questions were dangerous. Gestapo suppressed the questions, but thoughts remained. Hamburg was the breaking point of German morale. Hadn't collapsed yet, but cracked. After the Hamburg bombardment, for the first time in Germany, organized civilian resistance began. Sophie Scholl and the White Rose Group. In Munich, university students, stop the war, stop Hitler. Before more cities disappear, they distributed leaflets, wrote on walls, Hitler's war, the people's death. They were caught in February 1943, were tried, were executed. Sophie Scholl was 21 years old. Her last words, "The sun is still shining." Hamburg inspired them, because Hamburg showed the Nazi regime couldn't protect the German people, but resistance came too late, was too weak. The Nazi regime was too strong, and the war continued until 1945. The Hamburg bombardment was one of World War II's turning points. 1,000 dead, 1 million homeless. A city disappeared, but the war didn't change. Germany didn't surrender. The war lasted 2 more years. So what was gained? Strategically, shipyards were damaged. Production dropped, but temporary. 6 months later, Hamburg was producing again. Psychologically, German morale dropped. For the first time, German people thought of defeat, but still fought, morally controversial. 50,000 civilians, were they a legitimate target? History is still judging. Humanly, disaster. Families disappeared. Generations traumatized. City never the same. Hamburg was the inevitable result of war. Germany started the war, bombed Poland, destroyed Rotterdam, rained bombs on London, and in the end, Hamburg burned. Justice? Revenge? Necessity? Maybe all. Maybe none, but the result is clear. War destroys everyone. No victor, only victims. Hamburg's story isn't just Germany's story. War's story, humanity's story. Gertrude Weber died. Klaus and Heidi died. RAF pilots died. Arthur Harris died. But the story lives, because every generation must ask the same questions. Is war necessary? Can civilians be targeted? Is revenge justice? Do 2 wrongs make a right? The answers aren't easy. Never were. Never will be. But the questions must be asked. Again and again. Every generation. Because if Hamburg is forgotten, it can be repeated. If this story affected you, please hit the like button. Every like helps us reach more people with forgotten stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications. On the Germany at War channel, we tell the real stories of World War II. From the German perspective. Not propaganda, reality. Not heroes, people. Not victory, pain, and write a comment. Where are you watching from? Does your family have a war story? Share it with us, because you too are part of this memory. Thank you for watching.